Yeah, I'm sorry.
A little bit about what was the choice that he was.
I don't know much about Socrates, and I don't think that we have any historical narratives about him. It's all a guessing game. And I suppose my response to your question would be a good amount of projection on my part, how I see philosophy and how I see Socrates, a man who's very different from Plato, very different from Aristotle, very different from Heidegger. I'm guessing, like any young man, he had the desire to get married. And maybe like what Pepper had talked about last night, maybe once in a while, he had some experiences that he couldn't really understand, but it was very intense and transformative. But nevertheless, he wanted to be nice to his parents, so he said okay to their wishes, such as marriage, and then he had kids. But I think something happened to him. As we would say, popular culture, he saw the light maybe. And men's relationship to their wives and to their children are very, very different. They're far more detached than women are. It's much easier for them to walk away. Why, how, when, who, I don't really know. And I think once he got married, he realized he didn't really want to stay home as much and didn't want to talk to the kids as much. And part of it probably has to do with the fact that, we choose our friends so we can see our own reflection in them. Hello, hello. I don't want to go to a party and hear people, tell raunchy jokes. It's not fun for me. I can't see my reflection. I want meaningful conversation. I want something philosophical, And so maybe realized it was a mistake to be married and to have children. But I don't know. So I enjoyed, I suppose, conversing with people. And there's a passage in the Quran where Muhammad becomes very disheartened because he keeps going out there, he keeps talking to people, and no one listens. And if they listen, they can't really hear, they can't change, they can't act on the things that they hear. So a revelation comes to him that you're just a messenger. Your task is to just go out there and just tell people, what you think life is about, what you think gold is about, what you think justice is about. Whether or not they receive the message, that's not really up to you. It's only God who can transform or change hearts. And I think his only task was to go out there and just engage with people. I don't know if at night he would lay awake asking himself, why do I do this every single day? Running into sophists and these young folks who come running after me, but in the end I walk home alone because they lack understanding. And despite, very much like Jesus and Malcolm and any one of those heroes, having done a lot of good for his people, for his town, in the end he finds himself before 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 or 20 judges who ultimately condemn him. He's found guilty, but he has an option. He can either go back to life without talking to anybody about this stuff, or he could just die. They could crucify him. And I'm guessing this is like anyone who is really, really, really sick, that at first they really struggle. They will look for second opinion, third opinion to see if there's any cure out there. And then they realize that, the cancer is spreading through their body and there isn't much they can do. And they struggle, they fight, It's what we talked about last night. They begin to bargain and all that. They go through their own unique sense of depression. And in the end, they just accept the fact that they're going to die. And most cancer patients, what they usually do is that, from what little I know, they refuse to eat. Their body just rejects food. And, they kind of go into their own little cave and slowly they, die. And maybe Socrates had come to realize that even if he was to live, a few more years, who is he going to talk to? Especially if he's been told he can't really talk philosophy to anyone. Life without philosophy is meaningless. Why would anyone choose to die? Maybe they have found the whole business of life kind of meaningless. But, I'm guessing he walks away from life being very rich. Rich in the sense that he was married, he had good parents, he had children, he had conversation, he changed some people. There was a wonderful relationship with Plato, if it's true. Perhaps he saw inspiration and how short-lived it is. Perhaps he saw that someone was inspired, excited, and eventually, became a philosopher in their own rights. But at the end, he realized there isn't much else to do in life. Eating and drinking and smoking and just sleeping and all that. It's no fun. In some ways, I don't really know at what stage people just lose hope or desire or pleasure that's out there. A lot of us in this class like to do things out there. There are some people who just stay home and do nothing. And they're not depressed. They just don't find excitement out there. Is it a curse? Is it a blessing? I have no idea. Like the first couple of weeks when you really, really like someone, you don't go anywhere, you just stay home in bed with your companion. It's like you're fulfilled. There isn't anything out there that you need. Then the second week comes, and all of a sudden you realize you want to go for a walk. You want to see your friends. I think Socrates was sort of a fellow who just desired to stay in his home, not go anywhere, not to do anything, because there isn't much out there. He was really, I think, his own best companion, which is rare to find in anyone. Add to the fact that he didn't want to write. Most of us write to kind of just get things out. You just talk to people. Yeah. But you and I are not there yet. So should someone come down and say, would you like life or death? Well, there's still things that you and I need to do. So you should always choose life. Yes, Johan.
I don't have any questions.
Good job. Anyone else before we... Abi? Andrew?
Addiction transfer,
What is that?
stuff drinking alcohol, or drinking coffee with the same kind of intensity.
Oh, it's like when Ronald Reagan he was addicted to jelly beans rather than getting addicted to smoking.
I don't know about addiction transference. I think addiction of any kind, whether it's to philosophy or drugs or alcohol or anything, really, if you go back to our conversation last night, the pleasure-pain principle, there is something about certain things that we do, certain activities that bring about a good amount of pleasure. And we don't want those pleasures to end. Now, sometimes, and life is tough, life is frustrating, it makes all of us to some extent angry. It's filled with injustice of sorts. We're confused. You got to figure out what we want to do and how we're going to do them. And so every human being, I think, they carry this huge burden that they have to find some sort of a meaning for the next 40, 50, 60 years of life. And given the fact that our toolbox initially is so empty, and we are bound to make so many mistakes, and we pay for those mistakes through negative emotions and traumas and all that, you have no choice but to somehow walk away, or at least not being able to see those mistakes. Moments of incompleteness, moments of pain, and alcohol and drugs could be. Hello, Maela. How are you? Hello, Diana. How are you? Ah. For what?
Being like,
Oh no, we're not doing anything. Whether you do it because you want to escape certain realities of life, or you do it because life is, to some extent, boring and dreadful, and you want to just numb the fact that you think too much and you see too much, so you drink or you smoke. And then it just becomes routine. You do it every single day, and little by little, it becomes a habit. And it's no longer about escaping from certain miseries of life. It's just become something you do, like walking, like breathing. It's something you just need to do. Not as a means of escape, but because your body craves it, because, I don't know. Yeah. And it becomes part of who and what you are. And then after some time, you catch yourself and you want to kind of overcome the addiction, if it's something that's negative. Yeah. It's good to be addicted, just to the right things. Any,
I've never heard of, I don't know if the title of the book, but, Sisyphus, have you heard of that name?
heard of syphilis?
No, I have a question right now. I think so, yeah.
Chris, have you heard of Sisyphus? Can you tell them what it is?
Forgot the story.
Well, Chris is going to remind you. King Sisyphus is an interesting fellow because he doesn't want to die. He's fearful of death. And he wants to know why the gods are eternal and human beings are not. And so one day when Zeus is out to a brothel, Sisyphus sneaks into his room to see if he can find the mysteries of eternal life, but he gets caught by Zeus, and Zeus punishes him. But the first thing I think it's interesting to note is that he's aware of his own mortality, that he will be forgotten. It's something we talked about plenty of times. That maybe he enjoys life too much. I don't know, maybe he enjoys power too much. He doesn't want to go away. He wants to forever remain young and active. He doesn't want to get old, perhaps. He doesn't want to get sick. He doesn't want to, disappear. But you need to have experienced a few things. You must have gone through certain events in life to become fully aware that your time down here is quite short. And so you need to kind of do the best you can to make it as meaningful as you possibly can, or maybe just have a good amount of pleasure. What Sisyphus wants is he just doesn't want to die. That's the first thing. He doesn't want to die because of all the things he talked about. And Zeus says, okay, I'll give you eternal life. You'll become immortal. But you will only do one thing for the rest of your life, which is you'll wake up in the morning, you'll have your bagel and cream cheese and coffee, then you'll wear your, shoes, and you go out there and there is this ball of a rock. And you have to push it up. And you have to throw it over the hill. And he does. He tries at least. But by the time he gets to the very near the edge, he's just so exhausted. And the ball rolls back down, and he starts the journey again. Over and over and over and over again. And it's really a very sad story in the sense that as far back as I can remember, I cried to be held by my parents, and I was. Then I cried for ice cream. Then I cried for a bicycle. Then I cried for a companion. Then I cried for a car. Then I cried to graduate. Then I cried for a house and a job and a this. I mean, this yearning that I keep wanting to roll this rock up the hill and throw it over the hill so I can become happy. And, very much like Philly, these desires just don't end. Every desire is like a piece of, rock that you have to just push up the hill. And you do so because the assumption is at the end of this particular exercise, you will reach something that will make you extremely happy, and that happiness is never going to disappear. And the sad truth is that's not the case. That particular rock is never going to go over the cliff, and you realize every morning you have to push yet another boulder until the time you die. And maybe that's the thing with Socrates. Okay, so I have another conversation, I have another moment of inspiration, then I walk home alone. So I sleep, I have my breakfast, I go out again, I have conversation, I see people being inspired, and then inspiration fades, then I walk home alone. What's the use of all of that? And the way that Sisyphus, and I'm not sure if I'm accurate about this, but the way that Sisyphus finds freedom is by doing what all these new age teachers tell us. Enjoy the moment. Pay attention to the way you put your hands on this rock, the way you walk, the way you sweat, the way your body is stressed as you're climbing up the hill. And as long as you can be very present in each of these moments, you don't think about the past, you don't think about the future, because the past tells you what? The past gives you directions about the future, which is you're not going anywhere. Eventually this rock is going to come down. And I'm not really quite sure if that's the wisest path to take, that just be in the present moment, because really the past has a good amount of information to give you, and it protects you in many ways. Sure, it does create some obstacles, mentally, psychologically for you in terms of living your life. But next, anyone else? Abi? Story by Rumi. Probably not. Nothing comes to mind right now. I did 50 bags of concrete today, and I forgot to take Advil. So I'm in a little bit of pain. Anyone else? The moment Rumi comes to, a story comes to mind, yeah. Wolf? For yourself or when you present it to another? So, I don't really know. I think you have to be hungry for something. That hunger creates a sort of disturbance or pain. Out of that pain, if you're able to kind of put those particular emotions and thoughts in language, then you can frame the question really, really well. The problem with language is that you may ask a question, but I'm going to just only be interested in the keywords, the things that I myself am interested, And so your question will never be answered. Then the other thing is most people don't really understand their own questions. And by the time you do come to a place where you really do understand your own questions, you will never ask them because you understand it so well. How it came about, the anatomy of it, why you're asking, the sort of emotions in it, the sort of history that it has. And patiently you wait for the answer to come your way. When, who the hell knows? If you're really crafty and proficient, I think you can play with any question in a very creative way. It doesn't matter how ridiculous or superficial the question is, you can always elevate it. I think if you look at a question like Pretty Woman with Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, I think questions are just out there. They're like standing in the streets and they're willing to kind of lay with anyone, But I think it was through her and Richard Gere's interaction, all of a sudden, she's elevated for the first time. She understands perhaps what love is, what the relationship is. And he understands also that just because someone has a past, it doesn't mean that past will always remain. People can change. And so you can present a question. It could be, again, very, very superficial and shallow, but to someone who is profoundly able, they can do magic with the question. There is a scene in one of the books that you may have read, In Search of the Miraculous. It's the beginning of the relationship between Auspinski and Gurdjieff. And what happens is, they go somewhere, they sit, they begin to talk. Auspinski has a lot of questions. And one of the things that Auspinski says is that I ask him questions. The question is no more than maybe 10, 15 words. But his response is like a book. He puts so much into those questions or in the responses that I simply sit back in awe and I forget my own question. There is just so much information and so much passion in the way he answers the questions. And so it really, for the most part, depends, who you're with. The question itself doesn't really matter. Yeah. Chris?
My question would be, there seem to be people who have pain, they're broken in a way. Something about their lifestyle drives them to bring other people into that same pain. I guess I would just ask, why do they do that?
Okay. So it's a really good question. So let me do it this way. I'll make it personal and forgive me. It may bother some of you, but that's okay. Let's say there is someone very positive in this class, their outlook towards life. I'm not that way. Okay. Temperamentally, and because of some of the experiences I've had. And let's say by chance I happen to like that particular person. The only thing I don't like about them is that they just have a positive outlook. the cup is always half full. And I tell them, no, the cup is half empty. The cup is half full. No, it's half empty. And then they say, no, it's half full. I say, yeah, you have like 50 people who are thirsty. That half full of a cup is not going to do anyone any good. So let's just be real. It's half empty, and it's not going to quench the thirst of 50 people. And so, given the fact that human beings are alone in many ways, especially as we kind of grow and mature and begin to reflect, and we are broken, as you said, in a variety of different ways, we want to make sure that we have other people in our lives, that they can see the cup half empty, not half full. Now, I like philosophy, I like thinking, I like reflecting, and I try my best to contaminate, poison anyone who comes my way. Sometimes it doesn't work out so well because they take too much of the poison, they take it far too seriously. And I'm no longer 20, those stages for me are past. I don't really care for them, but when someone, who has a life, married with children, has a job, has a future, all of a sudden takes this stuff very, very seriously and comes to me and says, I think I'm just going to quit my job and walk away from this and walk away from that. Then I say, well, that's really not the thing you want to do. Stay with philosophy for about 10, 15 years, then go back to your companion. Have him or her around. Don't just walk away. Because I know eventually you're going to put philosophy in the closet and just go back to your regular life. But I think a different way of looking at your question would be the following. There is nothing wrong with the Jews, the time of Jesus. They have their synagogue, they read from the Talmud, they have their own unique community. Everybody's happy, And all of a sudden Jesus comes forth, and he's a little nuts, Jesus is. He's an introvert, intense introvert. He doesn't really believe in the letter of the law. He believes in the spirit of the law, and he's alone. You have all this feeling about who you are, what you are, the desert life, what you've experienced, you've seen the light out there, and you want to come back to your community and share your experience with other people. And so the only way you can do it is by tell them that they are wrong. He reads from Isaiah and then he tells them, well, you guys have been waiting for a Messiah. Here it is, looking at him. And he says something to the Jews that they've never known and heard before, which is they're born in sin. And the truth is that is his feeling. That is his life. That is how he thinks about life. But because he has a good amount of charisma, magnetism, because he's eloquent in a variety of different ways, and because there is just something about him that when people look at him, they kind of tingle on the inside. They feel a certain way. And so they begin to follow him. And as they follow him little by little, they begin to house, various components or characteristics of Jesus inside them, to the point that Matthew no longer goes back to his work. Neither does Peter or Paul or Jack or John. So they're like 70% Jesus and 30% just ridiculous. But the 70% no longer feels that they're a Jew. They're not a Christian, but they're certainly not a Jew. Okay? And so I think all of us have a tendency of doing that. I don't know if you've ever been around people who have been chronically depressed. They can't handle too much of a good time. They can't handle too much happiness. The world is dark and gloomy and bleak. So even when you're with them and you want to relatively have a good time with them, just kind of ease their life a little bit, what they find meaning in is finding something that's broken about you. And if they can't do it, they'll tell you a sad story until your joy goes away and is replaced, by sadness and sorrow. And I think for the most part, it's because whatever lives inside you find it to be valuable. At the same time, it does make you feel lonely. And you want to break bread, emotional bread with someone. So you have no choice but to break people the way you have been broken. And I think we're all guilty of that. I think the best you can hope for is find someone who's, or maybe be broken in the right way, and then share that brokenness with other people. And hopefully they'll find it interesting. Consider the trans community for a moment. It's not even 2% of the American population. Not even 2%. But it's difficult to be judged. And it's difficult to be judged and then to feel isolated. And so one of the ways that you combat the harsh judgment coming away from others is that you begin to advertise. And as you begin to advertise, you gain followers. And if you were 2, now you're 5. If you were 5, now you were 25. And now you can create your own vocabulary. The things that language or words that didn't exist like 5 years ago, all of a sudden they're here. That's what we do. And there is nothing wrong with it. Does it create confusion? Yeah. Am I contaminated by the discontentment of Socrates? Yes. Does Malcolm X make my life feel cheap? Yes. But I think if I was to inherit the brokenness of Gandhi or Malcolm or Jesus, I think my life, at least the way I think, it would be far more meaningful. But you should also, I think, you should be aware and mindful of who you want to break, and once you break them, can you protect them as well? I think that's the most difficult part. Once you have contaminated someone, once they're sick, they have a good amount of negative emotion, kind of like Plato's allegory of the cave. Once you tell people that these are the shadows, they're not real, your life is this or that, and they buy that particular way of thinking, then they can't go back to their life. And since you broke them, you need to protect them to some extent. Any, Nina and then Philip.
You mentioned how certain character traits or certain ways of thinking can pass from one person to another. And one has to study them. How is the direction of why does it go a certain way? Does it go both ways, or does it go one way or the other?
In all relationships, there's a power struggle. I don't want to give you my power. As a student, I don't want to give you my power, even though sometimes I get a feeling that what you're saying is right. But it's too much for me to give myself away completely to you and have you dominate me. So there is that struggle. Eventually, I think what's going to happen, let's just say, is that you and I will hang out, we'll spend a lot of time together, slowly, without you knowing. It's what we call thief at night, at least that's in the Persian world. That little by little, my ideas, my presence will eventually go inside you, and they grow bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point that you go home and you talk to Demetrius, but in my language, and your body language will be similar to mine. Now, you need to kind of plagiarize this for a long, long time. I mean, plagiarism or mimicking is really, really good. It's like learning how to play the piano by looking at the sheet music played by other people, made by other people, but you follow the path nevertheless. Until, and not everybody can do this, until you find your own voice. Some people can play Beethoven really, really well. They don't need to improvise. They don't need to create their own music. Just playing Beethoven, is a remarkable thing to do. I think if you're greedy and lustful and you covet things that you're not able to do, then that's your downfall. But for the most part, what usually happens is you copy something, it becomes you, then little by little you find your own voice. And that's where your autonomy lives. You know, Plato never wanted to go outside and talk to just a regular common person. His relationship to time, his relationship to perhaps how he saw people was very, very different than Socrates. Aristotle was even more different than Plato. But what you have in common in the three of them is that their love for philosophy, their love for thinking, their passion, very much the same. But I think your question was something different. It doesn't matter. Yeah. Philly?
Men and women who become nuns and priests, are they broken to a certain extent, or is it maybe an addiction to religion, maybe a little bit?
I think it depends on the time period you're talking about. I think if someone today was to say, I want to be a nun, you know, or a man nun, you kind of look at them a little weird. Why the hell would you want to be a nun or a priest? Are you crazy? I mean, look at it out there. It's beautiful. Especially in a culture that's profoundly secular. Now, some people, I think as Rollo May would say, they hunger for something. You know, they can't find anything down here in the tables and chairs of everyday life. And so the assumption is if I find myself a totem, a sacred ground, sacred space, maybe while down here I can reach up and touch something. There is a scene in the movie Elizabeth, the first one, with Kate Blanchett, I think. It's not completely historically accurate, but nevertheless, it's a great movie if you haven't watched it. She's in her temple in this room where the statue of Mary is there, and she's weeping because she just lost the battle. She sent her soldiers out there. They got crucified by the French. And so her advisor is right there, and she screams at him, "Get out." But before he's able to, she looks at him and says, how did this woman inspire and capture the hearts of all these people? Mary. Because there came a point in Catholicism where the character and image of Mary was far more important than Jesus. And so the church had to do something to reverse that. Okay? And that became, to some extent, the downfall of women, goddesses, and all those things, so that once again Jesus could be elevated. All that aside, her advisor looks at her and says, Mary was a symbol. There was something about her that when people looked at her down here, they felt as if they're being connected to something in the Garden of Eden or something divine. You know, it's what they call totem. A totem means, imagine that you and I met some 20 years ago. Let's say at In-N-Out. The moment you and I, our eyes fell on each other, we fell in love. And we sat In-N-Out in one of those boots, red and white boots. And I kept buying you a cheeseburger and you kept eating it even though you were full, about to throw up, but you didn't want me to go away. So we sat there for 5 hours. And then as I'm about to walk out, I have a heart attack and die. And this is your first love. You've never had such an experience. But life must continue. So eventually, after a good amount of grieving and acceptance, you walk away. And 5 years later, maybe you're married, you have a companion, whatever the case may be. But the politics of life certainly have captured you. And as you're driving to San Leandro, all of a sudden from 880, you see In-N-Out. And you park your car somewhere, and you begin to cry. Or maybe you begin to laugh, or you begin to dance. Who the hell knows how this impacts you. But what it does remind you is that once again, you're in touch with an emotion that you thought you had lost and forgotten. In-N-Out is where you and I met. You hadn't seen In-N-Out in about 5 years, and all of a sudden, you have a volcano of emotions erupting, and you kind of feel fulfilled, satisfied. For the first time in 5 or 6 years, that's your Sabbath. That's your resting place. That's what a totem is. And I think there are people who, for whatever the reasons may be, maybe they're broken, maybe just temperamentally they're looking for something that they can't find down here. They try out, a convent, a monastery, to see if what the desire is out there. But I think one of the lessons that I enjoy from, say, Buddhism and Islam and Judaism is before you go to a convent and before you go to a monastery, make sure your physical life is rich. Understand why you're walking away. Because then the chances of you being contaminated, the chances of money contaminating you, power contaminating you, will lessen to a great degree because you've been there and you've done that. And Gilgamesh is a great example of that. If you're poor and all of a sudden you have an experience, well, if you're poor and no one ever looks at you, you don't really know what attention is. You don't really know how it feels when 20 people are looking at you and listening to you. And that can be a very intoxicating feeling. And then you will lose your original goal, and all you do is just want to continue having attention from people, and eventually you're going to abuse them. So, yeah. Yeah, Chris.
So a lot of the people that are attracted to religion, people that have this temperament, they haven't been known as the kinds of people that put their physical life in order really well. So do you think it's part of the teacher's job to push them to take that more physical life and taste more?
If I was to, again, forgive me, make this very, very personal, I've had some students who say some crazy things, like they want to walk away from everything and go to the forest and do ABCD. I've been 20, I've been 30, I've been 40, I've been 50. To some extent, I know the ups and downs, as much as life has afforded me the experiences. And I know eventually that philosophy of the classroom is not going to completely satisfy you. I mean, you need different branches in life. It's like a cupboard. You need cups, you need saucers, you need bowls, you need plates, you need this, and you need a lot of things to kind of make your life relatively rich, okay? And so what I usually do is I never tell them to go somewhere, leave school, don't ever get married, don't ever have children. I'm not saying these things are beneficial to life, but they are important because you are part flesh and you have this other part that's, let's just say, very creative and passionate about, say, philosophy. It's good for you to struggle to get a PhD, especially now that you're going to Princeton, is it? Yeah. Are you going to lose yourself in the classroom? Are you going to be intoxicated or drunk with power? Absolutely. I think your physical life, if you protect it well, it will protect your passion. If you want to live a profoundly spiritual life, let's just say, I'm not quite sure what that means, but let's say you want to live a very spiritual life. Well, to some extent, you need to be self-sufficient. We don't want to beg people for money. We don't want to beg people for a room. You want to have enough power to protect what you have created, which is your reflective, spiritual, intellectual life. And just in case money gets in the way, well, instead of thinking about, say, philosophy, you're going to be thinking about how to make money. It's good to have a companion. You don't want to sit and think all the time. Once in a while, you just want to go somewhere, and just be a bum for a couple of weeks. It's good, I'm not all that sure about having children these days, but that depends on when you have them, how old you are, if you have any support system, because you need parents, you need uncles, you need grandparents, you need a lot of people in your life. So it's kind of like a buffet. The kid needs a buffet of people. If it's just you and your companion, it's not going to go well. It'd be very, 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 very difficult, So yeah, you need to have a relatively good physical life to protect. I mean, Wolf is a great tattoo artist. And if she wants to protect that particular craft, and if she wants to she's inspired to only design certain crafts on people, certain images on people. Well, if she has a lot of money in her savings account, she's going to pick and choose her customers. And if you're able to pick and choose, that's a good power to have in your life. What you have, I think, now is a lot of broken people who gravitate towards New Age philosophy, and tragically for them, they speak well, they think well, but everything is resting on an avalanche of garbage that lives inside them. They gain popularity, they have power, and then whatever philosophy they stole from whomever, it becomes just rubbish. And a lot of people will suffer because of it. Yeah. Anyone else before we go home? Yes, Johan. Getting? Andrew? Oh, Wolf? I'm sorry. Milo? Okay. No?
I was wondering if you could talk about how much effort that
This is just my perspective, and there are 1,001 out there, much better than mine. The culture from which I came is that, first, let me there is the everyday life and some of the dreams that come with it. There's struggle in life, and somehow your body needs to release the tension, the stress, the irritation, and then you have a dream. There are also dreams where you keep thinking about something, imagining, you're focused on a particular thing, and all of a sudden you have a dream about it. There is also a dream where you're working, let's just say, with a Socrates, who happens to be the centerpiece of every dream that you will have. So it really depends, first of all, on how your life is situated. If you're the person who just lives everyday life with all that struggle, if you're a person who's talented in the sense that you sit, you write, you think, and you just focus on something. And then there are the dreams that takes place with the call. You have found someone, you found yourself very attracted to their soul or their intellect, and so something about you has woken up, and then dreams begin to appear. In the Islamic tradition, the interpreter of dreams happens to be Joseph or Yusuf. Okay, he's the only one who can interpret dreams, no one else. And so, in my tradition, it's only your teacher who should interpret your dreams, if you have a teacher. So you have Pharaoh, who is a fallen entity, and you have Joseph, who's also fallen, but in a different way. The Pharaoh has dreams, he doesn't know what the dreams mean. He brings a lot of people in, and their interpretation never satisfies him. But then there is Joseph. He's called out, they have a chat, and for whatever the reasons are, what Joseph says to the Pharaoh satisfies him, and it rings true for him. To be a bit more pragmatic, dreams can be a great source of inspiration, but at the end of the day, they mean nothing. And most of the dreams that have depth and meaning to them, you will understand them 2 or 3 decades later, if you live that long. You know, even if you were to dream that, you have a lousy job and it's sucking your soul out of you, it's a great dream to have, but the truth is, if you don't have resources, you can't change your job. You don't have the luxury of quitting and then looking for a job for the next 4 or 5 months. Who's going to pay the rent? Who's going to pay for food? So even if you're inspired by a dream, it doesn't mean that it's applicable. Anyone else? No?
What if you have recurring dreams about deceased relatives that you're remembering them?
I can't speak about those things. I'm sorry. But all I will say is that you should get a picture of them, sit somewhere, light some candles maybe, just sit in front of the photo. That's all. Anyone else? This is such a boring class. I'm just joking. Okay. Forgive my low energy tonight. Yes, Johan. Okay. So let's do the 10 Commandments real quick. And let's talk about the 4 Gospels. And then we'll go home. Unless, of course, you have questions. I don't really want to do the 10 Commandments. Or Christianity. But I will if I have no choice. Kendra? Okay. Let me footnote the 10 Commandments by the following. I think these are for very, very, very advanced people. They're not really meant for us. They're good things to think about once in a while, reflect on, but for the most part, they're very removed from where and who we are. So, number 1. There is a word which is henotheism. It means the worship of one God without denying the existence of other gods. That is really the first commandment, but when you translate it in English and given all the politics that goes into religion, what you have is not henotheism, but monotheism, which comes into Judaism much, much, much later. Henotheism, the worship of one God, that's the first commandment. The worship of one God without denying the existence of other gods. So let's kind of unpack that a little bit. Imagine for a moment that you are married. You love your husband or you love your companion. But you cannot deny the fact that when you go to Pete's or when you walk around the lake, you're going to also find other people who are equally attractive. The only difference is, with your companion, you have intimacy. You share things. Okay? In terms of the first commandment, the way I see it, and the way you should see it as well, right, Johan, is the following. So there is Yahweh sitting on the top. And Yahweh, through his fingers or through his spirit, creates all these other things down here. We have no choice but to have desires. Every desire creates a pursuit. When you pursue something, that is what you worship. And there is nothing wrong with that. As long as you know that the thing you're pursuing has its roots in Yahweh and His power to create. Some of you exercise this. You sit, your companion has brought home large, deep dish, spinach, mushroom, pesto from Zachary's. And you are hungry. You were a monk, you wanted to just eat bread and water. Right? And they plate you 2 big slices of deep dish, pesto, spinach, mushroom. You're about to eat, but then you stop and you pray. You close your eyes. What are you doing? Who are you talking to? Why are you appreciating this? All of a sudden what you do is you spice your food with things divine. It becomes a religious activity. That's called henotheism. Now, if anyone of us in this class, okay, the task is not to overcome all the desires. The task is not to get rid of them. Don't be a Jesus Christ. The task is to have a lot of desires, but have the reflective abilities and the creativity to season everything you do with God's Spirit. به دریا بنگرم دریا توینم، به صحرا بنگرم صحرا توینم، به هر جا بنگرم کوه و در و دشت نشون قامت رعنا توینم. I look to my right, there is God. I look to my left, there is God. I look into the valleys, in the mountains, there is God. There is no place I can look where God doesn't exist. Guru Nanak, one of the founders, he's the founder of the Sikh religion, an offshoot of Hinduism and an offshoot of Islam. One day he goes to the mosque, he falls asleep, but his feet are pointing to the north where people face Mecca. So the custodian slaps him, belts him, sticks him, says, "What are you doing?" Poor Nanak wakes up and says, "What happened? What did I do?" He says, "You can't have the soles of your feet facing God. That's disrespectful." And so Nanak looks at this custodian and asks, "Which way shall my feet face where God isn't?" And that's the message of the first commandment. Okay? No desire is corrupt. No desire is bad. For those of you in this class who enjoy smoke that comes. We have children in this room, smoke where you see fireplace and chimneys, who enjoy smoking chimneys, right? There is nothing wrong with that. Do so. Do a lot of it. As long as you know the culture of peyote, the ceremonies that used to exist, the rituals, the elders. It wasn't escape from life or boredom or meaninglessness. It was a way where people were transformed. There is nothing wrong with anything. You want to drink, drink, as long as you're aware of its history and why people drank. They're good. Anytime they are tired and they want to run around and hit someone, they can. Any questions about number one? Excellent. Number two. Never have an image of God. No graven images. This is problematic. Language creates images. Thinking creates images. Writing creates images. When it comes to certain things, never speak of them. Think of them. Reflect on them. And I think Kierkegaard said it best. If you want to really understand the second commandment, fear and trembling, you are in the presence of something profoundly awesome that doesn't fit language, doesn't fit the human mind. You must just know that it exists. But this knowing must come with a great amount of feelings and emotions, to the point where you fear it and you tremble. So don't ever ask what God is, what truth is. They can't be spoken. The only thing we can do is indirect language. You speak to the door so that the window can hear it. If that doesn't make sense, it's a Persian thing that they say. You know, if our good friend here is a professional drinker and she doesn't drink at all, I look at her and say, don't drink, it's bad. But it's not really meant for her, it's meant for him. Hello? And I suppose just in case any of you in this class want to understand or know what number one is, worshiping Yahweh, it's just an experience. It's kind of like what Morpheus does to Neo. You create the proper physical environment so that an experience can come through. That's all. And once you have an experience, you can't talk about it. You can't write about it. It's just an experience. It's yours. There is this story that comes from Rumi, since Abi asked about Rumi. It's about, there was this wall in this town, and it was relatively tall, and people climbed it, and whoever saw what was on the other side would climb over and never return to the city. So people became curious. Why is it that despite the fact that our city has everything that anybody would ever need, would climb this wall, and whatever exists over there, they will climb over it and never return? So they decide to put a rope around this man's leg and wait for him to reach the top and wait for him to peak. And he did. And just as he's about to climb over, he is pulled back and people bombard him with questions. What did you see? Who is there? But he had lost the ability to talk. So, when it comes to the most important things of life, language fails, imagination fails, and it's best to keep your mouth shut unless you want to create shadows for people. Okay? Number 3. Watch the way you speak. This is like an Oakland way of talking about the Ten Commandments. Now watch your mouth. Now, do you have any questions about that? What is the third commandment? Can anyone say it? Do not, yeah, in vain. Yeah. In Buddhism, if you don't have anything interesting or important to say, it's best to keep silent. And I suppose it's the same way. If you were to connect the third commandment to the first commandment, which is, you have gum?
No.
Which is, all things come from God, right? There is no room for gossip. There is no room for chit-chat. Life is given by God. Death is given by God. In between is given by God. We have no choice but to speak. It keeps us from being overwhelmed by loneliness. But make sure that, again, your language is seasoned by the first commandment. If that makes any sense. It's something the German philosopher Martin Heidegger talked about, even though he was not a religious man, I don't think. That always keep death very, very close to you. Know that at any time you could fall apart. And if that happens to be the case for you, what you'll do is you will only talk about the things that are life and death related, with a tremendous amount of emotions inside. Number 4, keep Sabbath holy, or just find Sabbath and stay in it. Sabbath, it's a place of rest. And I suppose it means the following. Know who you are. That's your resting place. Don't allow people to create emotions for you. Be the owner of your own thoughts. Be the owner of your emotions, because you are autonomous. You are a law unto thyself. If I was to somehow connect Sabbath to stage 4 cancer and the people who have it, it'd be the following. There is no Sabbath when you hear the news that you have cancer and there's a good chance that you may die. There is no Sabbath when you deny it. There is no Sabbath where you're angry and you ask, why me and why not this other fellow? There is no Sabbath when you begin to bargain with God. Give me 5 more years and I'll do A, B, C, D. There is no Sabbath in depression. But you will find Sabbath when you come to realize that yes, you have stage 4 cancer. Yes, your life will be taken at any time. And yes, you have made peace with life, with sin, with mistakes, with your family. And now it's time for you to go away and it's okay. That's Sabbath. I would probably give it more religious language, but I'm not in the mood. So let's go to number 5. So remember, the first 4 have to do with you and God. You and God. Okay. Number 5 and on, they're about you and your obligations towards your life, society, people in your life. Love your parents. If you can't love them respect them. Now, many of you are young things in this classroom. There is no way that any of you, us in this class, can come to truly appreciate, honor, respect our parents, and for good reasons. Let me say a couple of things about parents, and then say a couple of things about kids, and then say a couple of things about honoring parents. Parents are complete failures. They really are. They don't do anything right. Nothing. But what you see about your parents does not deserve respect. However, what deserves respect is their intentions. Because parents belong to life, and life is filled with politics, and life is filled with struggle. And parents, they don't really have very much self-knowledge. Kids come out not because of reflectiveness. Children are the product of two people's bodies grinding against one another. That's it. Then all of a sudden, parents have no choice but to carry this cross. They are uneducated in parenting. They have zero knowledge about what it takes. They're not sociologists. They don't really know the forces that live in society. They're not political activists. They don't know what really takes place behind closed doors and how society becomes contaminated. Parents are basically human beings with all sorts of confusing desires and passions of their own. And all of a sudden, biology, psychology hits them, someone gets pregnant, the kids come out, now you love them, and you want to protect them. But it is exhausting. But what you need to realize, even for those of you who don't like your parents, you need to realize that there came a point where your mom, while you were in her belly, moments, she said, I'm going to be the best mother. I'm going to go to Target, buy the best crib, buy the best stroller, send them to the best school, buy them diapers made of gold, right? But then little by little, they become contaminated, and rightly so. And all you're left with is a mom and a dad who have beautiful intentions that simply don't fit life. And there is also a power struggle. Parents worry. Kids want to go out there and just push the envelope all the time. They want to break things. So there is a conflict of interest. And it creates a great amount of friction where parents are disgusted by their own kids and kids don't like their parents too much. The only way you can honor your parents, just know that their intentions are really, really good. They mean well. The other aspect of honoring parents is that when you yourself get a little older, you've tasted life a little bit, when you become a parent, you'll have moments where you become aware of the struggles that your own parents went through to raise you, protect you. And then you'll pick up the phone and call them and say, Mom, by the way, thank you. There is another way of looking at commandment number 5, which is the yin and the yang. That there is a part of us that's masculine, there is another part of us that's feminine. And you got to honor both of them. There are moments where you want intimacy and it's just flesh. There are moments you want intimacy, and it needs to be filled with love. Don't beat yourself up. Moments where bodies only grind. There are moments you sit and you bring the first commandment to life. You pray while you are eating. You season the food. There are days you just don't feel like any of that. You just eat the food like a pig. There are days you go to a classroom and you're filled with passion, and that's okay. And there are days you're nothing but a conveyor of information, zero passion, and that's okay too. Honor thy parents. There are two sides to us, the dark and the light, the meat and the spirit. Caesar and gold. They're both necessary. Number 6, don't lie. I don't know if that's a commandment, but it should be. Now, well, we'll talk about that later. To be able to not lie means you need to know the truth. In order to know the truth, you must be a good student. You must have the interest, the curiosity, the passion. You must know something really, really well. You can't make up stories. You can't allow your imagination to come into play. You have to remove the layers of dishonesty. Now, we are enculturated animals. I am who I am, and I say what I say because of my parents, my culture, my history. I haven't examined any of them, but I assume them to be true. You know, like the way you assume that you're in love, the way you assume that you know this and you know that. All of us have big mouths. We talk about all sorts of things without really having too much information about them. But we talk about them nevertheless, and we are willing to die for the things we believe. There are two forms of lying, one to ourselves and the other to other people. Lying to ourselves is extremely easy. Lying to other people, it's a bit more difficult. Because all of us in this class, abide by this superficial code of morality that it's best to tell people, it's best to be honest with people. Now, let me also add that this 5th commandment has a good amount of flaws. The only person you should never lie to is yourself. You should never lie to yourself. But in order to be honest with yourself, you need to care for the way you think. You need to care for the way you feel. You need to care for your life. Now, be honest with yourself, but you can pretend. You don't need to always tell yourself you hate being in this relationship. Let it be a lie. Because you also know loneliness is right there in the corner. That as a social animal, you need another human being in your life. Will you sometimes tell them you love them? Yes. Is it a lie? Yes. Is your intention good? Yes. You should always lie to people. Why? We all have thin skins. None of us in this class enjoy being told the truth of who and what we are. Jan comes to me saying, I'm going to get an A in this class, right? I read his essays. They're worth 0. What should I tell him? What should I tell him? Well, if I was to be honest and not lie to him, he'd probably jump from a cliff. So I lied to him. Oh, Johan, you're a prophet of the 21st century. You think so well. You write so well. We lie because people need kindness. You can only be honest with those people who have the capacity to receive truth or honesty. And if you want to know how honesty or truth are reached, read Daughter of Fire. Or, if you're allergic to that book, read the book of Job. He thinks he's a righteous man. He thinks he is sinless. He thinks he's good. He thinks he's this. He thinks he's that. Then he is tested. Then little by little, he is shown that he is nothing but a lawyer. Only near the end of the book does he become honest. Pain makes everyone honest. Now, number 6 or 7. Don't kill anyone. There is this age-old debate if there is a difference between killing and murdering. You guys can kind of wrestle with that when you go home and sit with your friends and companions. There are different ways that you can destroy something or kill something. Remember, we are a 5-part or a 4-part animal. There is a physical part to us that can certainly be killed. There is an emotional part to us. There's an intellectual part to us. And there is the intellectual, emotional that need to be destroyed if you want the spiritual part to awaken. So some part of killing is good. Okay? Now, you can kill people with your language. The sort of things you say to them. You can kill people physically, you can kill people emotionally, you can kill people spiritually. Let me give you an example. Our good friend, Philly First Day, proclaimed that she's a Catholic. Do I have things to say about Catholicism? Yes. Are they mostly negative? Yes. Now, I'm not going to claim that I have the power to make her doubt her faith. But imagine if I had the power. Would it be right of me to kill her faith? For what? For my own ego to be inflated. For my own desire of self-righteousness. Consider Socrates for a moment. You're holding hands with your companion, kissing him or her, screaming how much you love him, and then Socrates comes forth and asks you, what is love? And for those of you who don't know much about Socrates, he's like a 2-year-old. Why? And in the end, what you realize is that you have no idea what the heck you're talking about. And then you look at your companion after Socrates has destroyed your worldview. You look at him and you say, maybe I don't love him after all. Our good friend in the back asked a question about addiction and his desire, or someone's desires to overcome that particular addiction. Let's say addicted to drinking or smoking. Well, if you want to change someone, you certainly have to kill their lifestyle. That particular murdering is profoundly good and beneficial and helpful. And sometimes you just have to kill people because it's the best thing to do. It's the just thing to do. We do it in wars. Some of us in this class live in dicey neighborhoods. Is it true that people could change? Yes, but we have our kids running around. Do you and I have the time and the patience to wait until that change comes about? The answer is no. Would you have this dim desire to get rid of them? Absolutely. Number 8 or 9. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife and other things. To covet something is to desire it. The only way you can not desire anything is to be satisfied and content with what you have and who you are, and that's nearly impossible. I guess what I'm trying to tell you is most of these commandments are just wrong. They don't fit life. Any questions? Kendra? Yeah, Shantae.
Wait, did you notice that?
I don't even know what 10 is. I think I got them all mixed up.
Look.
Yeah, just a little. I may have missed 4 or 5, but that's okay. You guys can Google them. Let me also say the following about coveting something. Look out there, covet, want it. Just make sure it doesn't blossom into need. Because once something that you desire turns into a need, now you have an emotional relationship with it. That without it, you are nothing. That you have another thing having power over you. And in that case, you will lose your Sabbath, your grounding, your resting place. Can I tell you a story? You sure? Kendra knows, yes? No. Kendra knows the story much better than I. I won't tell it to you in full. Is that? No, it's good. We apologize for having such a boring class. I mean, these people are so useless. I apologize. Buddy? Khudafiz, Baba. It's a story about love, but it also is about coveting something. It's about a human being who had Sabbath, lived in Sabbath, had a tremendous amount of power in Sabbath, protected that for a number of decades, but all of a sudden lost it and became codependent to something that was on the outside as opposed to on the inside. His name is Sheikh Hassan. It's a story that was given to us by Fariduddin Attar around the 12th century. It's about this man who has about 400 disciples. He's like a Socrates or a Jesus Christ. Lots of people following him. He's a devout Muslim. He loves God. Ever since he was like a 2-year-old kid, he's now a 70-year-old man. Now, if you have been playing with religious images most of your life, most of your dreams are going to be religious. You're going to dream about Jesus and Muhammad and Christ and this, all that stuff. But on this occasion, this old man has a dream that he is in the city, looking up, seeing this young woman, age 16, maybe 14, I don't know. Blonde, blue eyes, fair skin. And he's salivating. You guys know what that means, right? He wakes up from the dream and says, what the heck? This doesn't make any sense. For the past 50 years, all of my dreams have been religious in nature. This makes no sense. Now, most of us, if you have such a dream, you try to forget all about it, but not this man. He says, I'm a teacher. Dreams mean something. They're all significant. They mean something. So he goes to the city with his disciples, 200 of them, looks up. The moment he enters the city, and there is this window, and the curtains are pulled, and then there is this young woman, blonde, blue eyes, brushing her hair. And in that instant, he comes to realize he's in love. He sits by the window and sings with his guitar. You know those cartoons and movies. And his disciples tell him, what are you doing? You're like a Christ. You're supposed to worship God, and yet you're worshiping this young woman. What is wrong with you? And he looks at them and says, no, for the first time I've truly come to realize what love is. I've never loved God the way I have fallen in love with this young woman. Sometimes we are blessed or cursed that we run into someone and within a few minutes there is this intense connection and we don't know why, but we fall victim to it. You thought that you could obey the first commandment, that there is only Yahweh, but not anymore. There is no Yahweh in sight. You're only in love with Yahweh's creation, and you've forgotten Yahweh completely. Long story short, wait, what are we talking about? What is this related to? Oh, coveting. That's right. Thank you. You have those moments too, Philly? Huh. Okay, now, I'm sorry, where am I? Now, remember all this happens first because of a dream, and then coveting the message of the dream, and then going to the city, and then desiring what you see. But it's not just a superficial desire. You're emotionally entangled now. The girl comes down after a few days and tells him, look, I know you're a Muslim. Burn the Quran. The woman is Christian. It's what they call tarsa. Tarsa in Persian means fear. And that's one of the things about Christianity. You're fearful of Christ and his judgment and sin and eternal damnation. So this young girl is very, very faithful to Christ. And so her task is to convert him. And what he does is he burns the Quran. Quran is the revelation given to Muhammad by God. So when you burn the Quran, you're also getting rid of Muhammad, and you're also getting rid of Allah. Then you tell him to drink alcohol. As a Muslim, you don't drink, but he drinks. And then she asks him to worship fire, and he does. The dangerousness of coveting. Once you feel empty without the thing that you have coveted, you will give up everything. You will sacrifice everything to attain it. Sometimes it can be a good thing. Most often, it's dangerous. It's negative. Just in case some of you in this class want to be a Buddhist and you realize that you're coveting the wrong thing, the Buddhists have a couple of exercises for us. Imagine you're sitting and writing an essay for this class. Or maybe you're just being very creative and you just are writing something that you really, really enjoy. That's the feminine part of you. All of a sudden, from nowhere, comes the masculine. I haven't had sex for a while. Maybe I should turn on my laptop and watch some images. Well, imagination comes into play. Now you begin to see images, and those images create desires. Now you want the things that you see. Then you need to release the stress. And the Buddha said the only way you can transform this particular coveting with another, go to your bookshelf, grab the Bible, read one of the Gospels, and what you have is the coveting that comes about by reading the scripture and the coveting that comes from watching porn. Now these two begin to wrestle. And should you, or if you're able or crafty enough to manipulate your own psyche, keep thinking about Jesus. Keep thinking about the verses. And eventually you're going to feel really bad for the images on your laptop. You will shut it down and you will go back to writing. So, covet. Just make sure it doesn't turn into a need. And make sure you covet the right things, not the wrong things. Anyone else? Anna? Maida? Wolf? Alexis? Separation? I haven't spoken to my parents today. I don't miss them. And I suffer from what David Hume called the problem of induction, which is for the past 40, 50 years, 60 years, I call and they pick up the phone. Every night after class, I call. I speak to my father for 10 minutes. I speak to my mom for 10 minutes. In the morning, my mom usually calls. So there is no anxiety there. I know that when I call, they'll pick up. Just in case I call tonight and I hear my mom's voice trembling a little, I will ask, what's going on? What's wrong with you? Are you sick? And then she breaks down saying, your dad had a heart attack. He's dead. All of a sudden, there is this feeling of separation, loss, that I'm left with images, but these images no longer have a physical container. I have an image in my head that tonight when I go home, I'm going to call my father. It has a physical container. But tomorrow after class, the desire will be there. I'm going to, like addiction, I'm going to pick up the phone, call, but my father will not pick up. And I feel as if I am separated from something I want in my life, but it can no longer be there. This morning, while I was pouring concrete, I got a text. I don't know from who, a 916 area code, probably one of my friends. Amir, I heard that you had open heart surgery. Can I come visit you? So I have no idea who this person is. I just deleted the text. I don't care. There is no anxiety there. There is no care there. There is no interest or curiosity there. I don't feel like I'm separated from a long-lost friend. So whenever you talk about separation, there has to be some emotional connection there. And that emotion must create a good amount of meaning and relevance for you. It creates who and what you are. The more intense and the more all-consuming, the less power you have over yourself. And when it's not there, the more you feel abandoned, isolated. It's kind of like you fall in love, and let's just say love is Yahweh, and it trickles down, and it is housed in a physical body of someone, let's call him John. And you get to meet Yahweh through John by this thing called love. And that particular experience creates Sabbath for you. And you find the relationship so sacred that when you gather with your friends, you realize that they're using relationship, intimacy, sex in vain. They're making a mess of this whole thing. Why? Because you have found your paradise down here, but they have lost it. Okay? You have your Sabbath, but they have been expelled from it. And then he says, I have to go to work. Or I have to go on a business trip for 4 or 5 days. Now, your body, your mind, your soul has found Sabbath in this particular space with this particular person. In his absence, it's like the umbilical cord is cut. You've been separated. روزها فکر من این است و همه شب سخنم که چرا فارغ از احوال و دل خویشتنم از کجا آمدنم بهر چه بود به کجا میروم آخر ننمایی وطنم مرغ باغ ملکوتم نیم از عالم خاک 2-3 روزی قفسی ساختند از بدنم. That in union you grow wings and you live in the sun. In separation your wings are clipped and you live in a cage. And you want to sing, but there is no one to hear it. And even if there are people who can hear, they don't really understand. So, you only speak about separation because you have tasted union. In union, you have experienced yourself basking in the light. In separation, you're plunged into darkness. And in darkness, you remember how light or union made you feel. Then you become sad. In sadness and sorrow, longing, yearning. These are like cries without shedding tears that take place inside your soul. You sit and you pray. It's kind of like what August Comte used to do. You paint a picture of this girl that you loved. Now, August Comte hated religion. He didn't believe in it. even though he made a cult and he became the head of this cult and people worshiped him, he felt the pangs of separation so intensely that every night he would kneel on the chair, look at the painting and worship it. Separation is agonizing. And the more you care, the more you love, the more your emotions are there and they're intense, the more you feel the pains of separation. Now, I don't know if you know the story of Layli Majnun. There are many different versions of it. Shakespeare did an awful job, but that's besides the point. You have Khosrow Shirin in Persia, and you have Layli Majnun in India. So what happens is, they're sitting in the classroom, Majnun, who is a boy, and Layli, who is a girl, and they're supposed to sit and just keep writing the word Allah. Okay? And by chance, the instructor, the teacher, looks at the notebook of Majnun, this boy, and instead of writing Allah, he writes Layli's name, the girl's name, Layli, 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 Layli. And the teacher says, you're supposed to write the name of God. Why are you writing the name of that girl over there? Okay? Because union, you know. So he gets slapped and spanked. And his parents come, and what they realize is that when the teacher was smacking this boy on the hand, the girl suffered as well. She had the same marks. So they separate. In separation, this boy couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. He's now a grown man, he's like 20. By chance, they meet in the bazaar somewhere, like Lakeshore, and their eyes are glued. But they're not meant to stay forever. Layli gets married to some prince out there, and Majnun, this boy, is stranded in the desert. In separation, the desert becomes a symbol of the psychological and spiritual intellectual condition of the person who is suffering separation. And in the desert, what do you have? You have nothing. You have only sand, and you have the scorching sun. There are nobody, no friends, no one you can talk to. There are no shades. You burn in the agony of separation. And so out of desperation, this young boy talks to a deer. Run to Layli's house, who lives with this prince. Tell her, I miss her, I love her. And this is another symbol that in separation, there are ways you can connect. There are ways you can release the tension, the stress. You write, you pray, you cry, you sit, you reflect. You do all the things by yourself when you were doing it in union with this other person.
Hey, sorry about this. Anybody have a white Ford or Honda in the parking lot right now?
What happened to my car?
Where's your car at? Where did you? I'm surprised you're not
In the parking lot.
No, is it across the street?
Yeah,
Are you sure?
yeah.
It is not over there right now.
I know.
I was gonna say, don't scare me like that. I'm the supervisor. I gotta write reports. I'm not to call like several different people.
Can we do that?
What?
Call people.
You want me to write a report?
Yeah, man, it's fun.
But you know where your car is.
Yeah, but they can have fun with people.
Crazy. He wants me to worry. How you doing today, guys?
It's okay. You should come by tomorrow. Maybe we'll have food.
Look, I'm here Monday through Friday. I'm gonna come check in on y'all every day. How about that?
Sounds good.
Y'all take care.
So, you know, my own teacher passed away a couple years ago. I have a picture of him in the office, right in front of the computer. So whenever I'm like writing, or when I'm not writing, when people are in my office and they're like talking gibberish, I kind of look at the picture and say, man, he did all this work with me, and I'm wasting it by talking to this idiot over there. Not there. Or I'm watching like a YouTube clip on how to use nail guns. So because the problem with separation is that it creates a good amount of pain, and again, we're not the sort of creatures that enjoy pain too much, so we try to do things to forget. Maybe drink, maybe smoke, maybe just go for a walk, do all sorts of crazy things. But if you have enjoyed the union, if you have enjoyed the experience, what happens in time is that you will grow accustomed to pain, so much so that it becomes a source of creativity. The poem I've read before, or I've said before, با درد بساز چون دوای تو منم. If it's the right kind of pain, find a way to become intimate with it. It's its own remedy. There is a passage in Rumi that he says, love is poison. It's so strange because love is also the antidote to the poison. It creates sickness, it also creates health. That's how it is. Yeah.
I actually had a question about the commandments.
Sure. Yeah.
This question might not make sense, so feel free to skip over it. I was wondering, is there significance to the fact that most of the commandments are phrased as negatives? Like, don't do this, don't do that. Like, is there a difference between a moral code that forbids certain behaviors rather than encourages? Because instead of saying, like, do not lie, do not covet, they could have said, be honest, be content with what you have, right?
Well, I think God had a negative sense of humor, I suppose. There is a story that I borrow from Idris Shah. Idris Shah, I think he was born in Afghanistan and then he was shipped to England. He speaks the most eloquent English style. It's like music. And he thinks really well, and he has like 50 books out there. He tells a story about one day going to his father's study and forgetting to close the door when he left. And so his father, instead of telling him, you forgot, he says, Idris, I think I forgot to close the door to the study. Can you go close it, please? Didn't reprimand him, didn't blame him. In fact, not to make his son feel bad, he took the burden. He said, I did it, so can you just do me a favor and close the shop or close the door? I think the commandments are not as generous, and maybe there's a good reason. If you happen to be God, or if you happen to be a sage, if you happen to be a parent who really cares and realize that your kids just don't listen and don't listen well, the way you speak to them is going to be mostly in negative tones, that do not drink, do not smoke, do not drop out of school, do not hang out with these people, do not come home late. It's going to be less positive than negative. And I think part of it really has to do with the fact that we don't learn well, we don't respond well to positive, but negative, because in negative there is so much fear. I can't tell you, Johan, write a good essay, but I will say, you're going to fail this class. A more evolved thing would be to say, sit and write a good essay. But knowing how busy your life is, knowing the fact that you're in the 21st century, you don't have much respect for your elders, your life, again, is busy, and you don't really like this class, and it's a chore you gotta do, I gotta create fear inside you. And the fear is, you're not going to pass this class, you're not going to get a good grade, you're not going to go to a good school, you're not going to get a good job, no one's going to marry you, and you'll be, out there with nothing. And the negative, it seems, will impact you in a much better way than a positive, I think, and I may be wrong. The other thing you need to know about these books, whether it's the Old Testament or New Testament, is they're really written for political reasons in many ways. There are 39 books, I think, or 38, and it has taken 1,000 years to be collected. And you have the priestly group, you have the Yahwist group, you have 4 or 5 very, very powerful groups at different time in history coming up with these texts. And what their intention is, I'm not a biblical scholar, I wouldn't know, but what little I do know is that there's a good amount of politics involved. Now, why would you want to do the negative as opposed to positive? Well, you have a guy named Moses who comes and frees you from the bondage. He opens the sea, he takes you to the promised land, he goes away for 10 minutes. Once again, you worship the calf or the cow or the this or the that. Then he becomes so disappointed, he throws the tablets down and says, you guys suck. Near the end, he says, you know what? I'm done with the Jews. I'm going to go away for good. My brother Aaron is going to take over. This is not a man who sees positive qualities in human beings. He sees flaws, many flaws. He sees people who don't have the ability to learn or learn well. They are consumed by forgetfulness. They're vultures. They're greedy. And so they're the negatives. And I really think they work better. I go back to Niccolo Machiavelli, the author of the book, The Prince. It's much better to be feared than to be loved. Just make sure you're not hated. Or if you love, make sure your love has a good amount of fear in it as well.
Speak a lot about men, masculine, feminine, and I guess I'm wondering if they're innate characteristics or if they're societally based or if it's a mixture of both.
Can you say the question again?
You speak a lot about men and women. And the differences between their characteristics, especially with parenting, sex, and then masculine and feminine. And I'm wondering if you view those things as innate characteristics, as societal characteristics, or as a mixture.
I can't say I completely understand your question, but let me just, what little I get from it. So there are 2 very powerful forces in history, and they've always been there. One force has to do with keeping and protecting the culture, the narratives that always existed. You preserve what's there. The other is the force of innovation, creativity, walking away or breaking the old, and journeying to the new, the unknown. Okay. With the exception of maybe 4 or 5 tiny moments in history where women have had a good amount of power, and they were in charge of their community, not so much men, but women. And with the exception of a few tiny moments in history where you and I worshipped goddesses, not gods, not male deities, but female deities, 90%, maybe close to 95% of the power play has been in the hands of the masculine, okay? Women have been in the business of taking care of the home, raising kids, cooking, cleaning. That's their kingdom. Men have been in the business of warring, battling, going out there, getting their hands dirty and coming home. For thousands of years, that has been the tradition. Now, there are 2 groups of people. One say, let's preserve that, because if we change it, we have no idea what the outcome is going to be. Okay? Some people say, look, women are as intellectual as men are. They're as creative, they're as powerful. Let's go where we haven't gone before, kind of like Star Trek. Okay. Now, the problem with innovation or getting rid of the past and entering the new is that you're dealing with a lot of unknown. I mean, you have to understand, we have about maybe 5,000 years of recorded history. That's our heritage. Okay? That's your wealth. That just in case something about life goes bad or falls apart or begins to smell in a way you don't like, go to history. Examine the narratives. See if they have offered any solutions. See, for the longest time in our life, just in case you run into like a midlife crisis, well, the culture says it's a spiritual crisis. You go back, you read Gilgamesh, you read the Buddha, you read Jesus, you read Muhammad. You go to the spiritual heritage, okay? When you get rid of that and you make the culture all neat, secular, and religion becomes a very tiny footnote with tiny little prints that you can't even read, then when something about you goes wrong, when you realize that your life lacks meaning, well, you have destroyed this heritage. Not what the hell do you do? Now you're in the unknown. The innovative force is the dark force. That you want to create something, but you don't know the outcome. But there is no reason to go back because there is no back left. You know? And so there are, again, myself, I think as you get older, and it's something that's always been the case. You know, in times of Socrates would say, our youth have become so corrupt. It's 3,000 years ago. No cell phone, no technology. People were much more respectful. How could young people 3,000 years ago be so immoral? Well, for Socrates, it was because, well, Socrates was reflective. You know, he demanded certain things from people who couldn't see it, so he kind of looked at them negatively. As you get older, you become a force that desires to preserve things, keep things the way they are. Because now you know too much, you see too much. You know, there is nothing wrong. Let me make it this way. So I have 2 kids. Okay. I am hetero, my brother is hetero, my sister is hetero, my father, my mother are heteros. Marriage for them have a tremendous amount of value. Okay. I don't think I'll live long enough to see my kids marry, but let's just say I do. I don't really know what it means to have a child who's gay. That for me is the unknown. I wouldn't know how to introduce that particular concept to my parents. I don't know how they're going to react. There is a whole host of things that need to be shifted and reshifted over and over again for people to adjust. Will I love? Absolutely. Will I know what to do with the face of life? Especially homosexuality in the 21st century, relatively new, 50 years. It's not enough time to create the proper narratives. Stories, meaningful stories, take a long time to be created and then to be cemented. They are myths with which help you live. You know, once you destroy that particular story and you want to generate new stories, well, you have to wait for a few centuries for these stories to gel so they could have meaning. I don't have 200 years. And 50 years is not enough. And my kid is going to walk into an unknown for whatever the reasons are, and he's going to plunge me into the unknown. I'm not going to destroy my love for him, but I will be in a great amount of pain because I don't really know how he's going to function and how his future is going to be. So do I want to preserve what is known to me? Absolutely. Does that mean I will become an obstacle to him wanting a different kind of a life than the one that I have or my parents have? Probably initially, yes. Until I realize I have no power over his choice, then I will give in. How long that will take, I don't know. What I can tell you, though, from what little I've observed in society is the following. I think there is some kind of a wisdom in the stories that have been created for us. Because for the longest time, when it comes to children, not so much parents, when it comes to children, because they're profoundly weak and vulnerable. When you allow marriages to become casual, and when you allow divorces to become even more casual, what cracks are the kids. What hurts are the kids, especially in the first maybe 7 to 10 years of their life. Women now want autonomy. It's their right. Women now want to be creative. It's their right. Women want to live their own life. Their right as well. But inside the woman lives two forces. You know, there's a desire to be autonomous, owner of my own life. There's also the biological part, which is they want to be a mother too. And these two sometimes don't go well together. Some people can manage really, really well. Most can't. And we have also created a culture where people are just born to be unhappy. Nothing makes them happy. Whether it's privilege, whether it's technology, who the hell knows? But what you have is now our connection to the narratives about marriage, about divorce, about children, about parenting. They've all decayed to some extent. And what becomes of the kids, it's all in the dark. I don't know. So is it best to go back and keep the old stories alive? Maybe for the sake of the kids. Or maybe not. It's too late, really, for all of that. You know, once the dam breaks, it's finished. But if you were talking about masculine and feminine in a metaphoric way, symbolic way, I think Jesus said it most eloquently in one of the Gospels. Give to God what belongs to God, and give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. You're creative. You know, respect that about yourself. At the same time, you know, you should know that if you want to protect your creativity, go to school, study literature, you know, and make that a way to create money and livelihood for yourself. At the same time, you also get nourished by being in the classroom, perhaps, teaching English, teaching writing, making money, as well as expressing your creativity. Because you will destroy your passion for literature if you're working in some cubicle. It won't survive. Yeah. So, let's say that, I'll give it to you in a couple of ways. Okay? به می سجاده رنگین کن گرد پیر مغان گوید که سالک با خبر نبود ز راه و رسم منزل ها. As you know, Muslims, they have this prayer rug. So when they pray 5 times a day, and when they want to pray, they kind of roll out this rug, they stand on it and then pray. So Hafiz says, If your teacher says pour wine on the rug, you should do so without any question. It's a very blasphemous thing to do. But you do it for one reason. Praying, the rug, the ritual, your belief system, your faith have now become obstacles to your growth. That particular blasphemy is actually good for you. Sometimes you need to break the idols, the things you worship. You know, it's like you feel suffocated by something, and your only way towards freedom is to just get rid of it. Sometimes it comes in the way of religious traditions and rituals and practices. Okay? Now, before we talk about blasphemy, you need to talk about belief systems. Okay? I don't know what it is that you're talking about when it comes to blasphemy, what the context is. But whatever you think to be wrong has to do with your faith and your belief system in something. Okay? Before again we talk about blasphemy, you need to ask yourself, well, how did that particular belief system come about? You know, let's say you have removed all humanity from Jesus Christ. He's all God. Okay. And then I tell you that Jesus, in fact, did some naughty things. Now, let's say that instead of being creative, I actually become crude and use language that you may not really appreciate. And you say, well, why are you blaspheming? Okay. Remember now what Jesus had done some years ago in the temple, where he says, you shall not see me here again until you learn how to cry, for I and the Father are one and the same. Now, you're not saying this to 21st century Oakland people. You're saying this in the temple to the rabbis and the Jews, where it's only Yahweh. And Yahweh doesn't have hair, doesn't have a face, doesn't have a nose, doesn't have human flesh. Yahweh is out there. No graven images. Can't even use language to describe him. And here you have a guy who says, I and the Father are one and the same. And what did the rabbi say? You blasphemer. What exactly did Jesus discover about the Jews? That their image of Yahweh has become an obstacle to their growth, to their understanding. That they are in fact an obstacle to wisdom. That not only do they not get to paradise themselves, they're also shutting the door to those who want to get to paradise. And you realize that what was wrong for the Jews was in fact right for Jesus. So, blaspheming has two parties. One who wants to break something, one who wants to protect something. And these two worlds collide. If I was to bring it down to a far more simpler version, it would be the following. You are a mother, you've been around the block a few times, your son is fresh. Almost everything he does is like blasphemy to you. And the only thing you can do is to punish him verbally. And by verbally, I mean giving him your insights, making him feel bad for the things he enjoys. And what you're basically doing is you're breaking or destroying his crosses, the things or the desires he worships and pursues. So
in the Bible, when they talk about blasphemy, like the way you explain it, it makes sense depending on where you're at. Did it one way, bad in another. But in the Bible, this is the worst sin, pardon sin. It's unforgivable. So I guess for me, when they talk about it in in the Bible. It's more so just, it's blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, but the way you explain it, it's more, but sometimes it's necessary.
When you talk about the Holy Spirit, when you talk about the Trinity, this is something that has been borrowed from the Greeks. You know, it's not really something that Jesus talked about. It's something that was added much, much later to the Christian tradition. So,
It's more so for you.
well, no, the Greeks, they have a rich philosophy of life. And the idea of Trinity has been around for a long, long time. Body, mind, soul, past, present, future. You know, God, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Karl Marx has it, Sigmund Freud has it. But what you mostly have, the Christian doctrine, is really just Christian, I mean, it's a Greek philosophy. But if, for example, you were to be a student of a really, really good, say, teacher, someone who had, I suppose, the living Christ inside him or her, one of the things that teacher would probably do is get rid of the idea of Trinity that lives inside you. But you're going to resist. You're going to find that particular teacher to be blasphemous. But that teacher, what he or she will recognize is that that particular belief is the very obstacle to your understanding. Yeah. Anyone else before we? Kyla, you didn't ask anything tonight. Maybe you should. Okay, Pepper? Kendra? No one? Well, what time is it?
8:25.
Anything else you want? Myra? Wolf? So tomorrow we'll do, hopefully we'll talk about Jesus a little. We'll do Muhammad a little, if it happens. If it doesn't happen, it's okay. It'll be our last night together. Don't be sad, Johan. So have a good evening. Stay safe. See you tomorrow.